I'm Angela, a fashion designer and online instructor, and today I want to talk about taking a simple skirt and adding pockets. Maybe you have a phone or something you want to add to it. Well, this is really easy to do, and we're also going to add a center seam, which is really fun for top stitching. So here's the skirt that I've taken from a basic skirt like we've been doing all season. I've added some fun pockets, crazy lining. I'm going to show you how to add these pockets, do the top stitching, and create the seam. So first of all, to create a center seam, this pattern is cut on the fold. This is the easiest pattern alteration you'll ever see in your life. All you have to do is add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's it. So take your center seam where it says cut on the fold and add a seam allowance. That's it. So there's my center back. I've already sewn that seam and did some nice top stitching, which I will show you how to do that shortly. That's it. So I can do that to the front and the back. But the pockets, oh, they require just a little bit more work. So here is my pattern, and I'm going to this is what you have. You have a piece that you need for inside your pocket, which is right here. And then you have the top piece. And then I always like to use crazy, crazy linings. So it's basically going to look like this is how it's layered. So we need to create all 4 of those pattern pieces. So I have a few pieces of paper here, and what you need to do is measure on yourself where you want your pocket, how wide you want it. So how much room do you need for your hand? If you look at this pocket, this one goes in, I don't know, about 4 or 5 inches. And how far down? Can I reach my hand in there? Yes. I could also fit my phone in there. So just draw yourself a nice curve. That's it. Yours might be longer, it could be any angle that you want, but that's going to be my pocket. So the next thing I'm going to do is just cut this off. Now, I either need to add a seam allowance to that or I've allowed for the seam allowance. So we're going to say I've allowed for the seam allowance, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's already added. All right, so that's this layer right here. The next thing we need to do is create the pocket and the inside lining. So the inside lining, I'm just going to trace along this. I have a piece of white paper under here, if you can see that, okay? I'm designing my pocket on the inside. So this is going to be the piece that's that goes attached to here. Slide this down a little bit. Do you want it on a curve? Do you want it straight? It's totally your choice. And I will leave this pattern on the blog so you can download this pattern if you just are not into drawing it yourself. I'm just freehanding. Looks like a good pocket to me. Can I fit my hand in? Yes, I sure can. So the next thing I'm going to do is just cut 2 of these. Where did I put my scissors? Here we go. I'm going to cut 2 of these around the bottom. And then this is along the side of the pattern. And now I'm not going to cut anything else, and you'll see why. So this pattern piece here will fit inside of this area, which will be fine. But what about the bottom pocket? So let me bring these up here so you can compare. So I have this that goes underneath here. This is going to get sewn to this area, so I'm going to put this to the side. And now I need to draw the bottom. Let's see. So I'm just going to get rid of that because I've already cut it. This piece needs to be far enough on this inside area. So I've actually followed the same line of the skirt if I would put this back in. So you're going to trace around this, make the pocket exactly the same on the inside, but for this section, trace around and notice how much extra room I gave myself. That's almost 3 inches. So you take that, you can just tape this back to your pattern, draw around this, and then take this away and add 3 inches all the way around. This is your pocket insert. The reason you add a little bit of extra room is you don't want your lining to be sticking out right here. Okay, and once that's finished, I'm going to just slide this out of the way. I'm taking this back to our pocket piece that we drew. And I'm just going to do this with the dotted line because I'm not going to cut on this line. So this is my lining right here that matches this, but we need a seam allowance, don't we? We sure do. So if I'm going to add a seam allowance to the lining, this is a little complicated, so you can just download this pattern if you want. But what I can do is add 1 inch, which would be 1/2 of an inch to each of these pieces. This piece is already cut, so I can't add a seam allowance to that now. So now I can go ahead and add 1 inch. So if you didn't follow that, don't worry, you can go to the blog and download it. But that's how you can design your own pockets, and this works really nice because if you have a big phone or you have something particular you want in your pockets, that's what you have. So that's this piece here. And now once I sew this with the seam allowance, this is going to line up perfectly. So let's go to the sewing machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew this inside pocket. And how this is going to get sewn together is the lining goes on the top. Now this is a little tricky. You're trying to sew this curve to this curve. It can get a little complicated. So what I like to do is keep the lining on the top side like this. And just going to go and start stitching. You're stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'll try to keep my hand out of the way so you can see this. You just stitch and stop. Move that fabric out of the way, and I'm just lining up this edge, making sure there's no wrinkles right through this area. I don't care about over here. Stitch, just lift it up a little bit, wrap it around that edge. If you're really getting nervous, you can go a little slower if you have a speed button on your sewing machine. Go all the way around. Now when I get to the top edge, you're going to notice something. It won't meet at this edge because I didn't allow for a seam allowance on both pieces, but it should match up right at the 1/2 inch mark. It looks like mine might be a wee bit off, but we're close. So there's my piece. And it doesn't quite match right here, so don't worry about that for right now. But when you do that, it should, underneath here, this will not match at the edge. It will match up here. You give that a good pressing, and that one's ready to go. The next thing that I have is this piece here. This is my pocket. This part can get very tricky, but this is the most important part. 1/2 of an inch seam allowance, again, stitch around that curve, make sure you're not stretching the fabric. Now because I'm using a narrow seam allowance, I do not need to clip this. It's all in the pressing. So let me show you how this is done. So lay your fabric down and fold back your pocket. And notice how I'm folding where there's just a smidge of the denim showing. And by doing this, I won't have to worry about the lining popping out later on after I top stitch. It's just a little trick. So I've pushed that lining to the back. You can see a little bit of the denim, but you don't have to use twill tape or anything on your pocket. Nice crease, and now let's go back to the sewing machine. Let me just show you this closely. There's the denim, there's the lining. As cute as this lining is, I might not want it popping out. I'm going to change to a triple stitch, and the stitch length is going to be 3.5 or 4.0. Test it on your fabric. And I'm just going to stitch all the way around. I'm lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge inside of this foot. You could also use the mirror image and put the needle a little bit closer to the edge of your pocket, whichever you prefer. All the way around. The top stitching is so important because this is what really makes your garment look professional. If you have a hard time going around the curves or keeping it straight, you can lower the speed. So what I have here, I'm going to go ahead and move this to the side. I already have this piece finished. I've already pinned this. I've already stitched it twice. Let me show you the back side. What I've done is I've laid the pocket on top of each other and pinned it in place. One thing that I didn't point out is on the back of this pocket here, you're going to want to serge that because that could fray. The edges could fray. So I've already serged that here. I've pinned my pocket together all the way around, and now I'm just going to go ahead and sew this with a regular stitch, just a regular straight stitch. Again, serging all the way around. I do like to pin my pocket together, even though you see me, I don't use pins quite often, but just to make sure it stays together just right. Now I would run this through the serger, finish that edge. So on the inside, what I have is the whole pocket is finished. It needs to be attached to the side and up here. I'm just going to run this through the machine with inside that 1/2 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch. So it's about 1/4 inch. You could use a basting stitch or use a stitch that's longer. You're just tacking this together because you're going to treat this entire front seam, this entire front, like the front pattern. So you're going to pretend when you sew the skirt together that this pocket isn't even there. And right here. Okay, so that's tacked in place. And the last thing that you might have noticed on the skirt is I have some stitching right through here and right through here. The reason being is this area is going to get a lot of use with your hand going in and out. So I just figure out where your seam allowance is going to be, 1/2 inch, go inside here, and if you have the bar tack stitch, that's great. I'm just going to use a zigzag stitch, whatever width you want to use, and just stitch. So there's the first one. That's a little bit long, and you're going to do the same one up here. So let's go back to this skirt and just compare what we've done. There's our pockets. I can reach my hand in. The inside looks like this. And I'm going to treat this entire pattern piece like one when I sew it together with the back. Just sew that and sew the skirt like you've seen in the previous lesson. That's how easy it is to add a center seam and pockets.